Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. I'm your host, Andrew Gelina. With me in studio is Jen McComas, CTO of Energy and Utilities Industry Squad at IBM. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to visit with folks in person.
Finally, I know we're getting ready to emerge like the rest of spring.
So way back in the day, what kind of led you into technology and the industry?
Well, I think like a lot of grads coming out of school with bachelor's degrees in the early 90s, I think we might have all tumbled into technology. I attended Brandeis University, which is not far from here, and I studied political science with a background in peace studies. And I thought that I wanted to go to law school, figured out about my junior, senior year that maybe that wasn't the road that I wanted to take. So, upon graduation, that left me with a very robust resume in food service. So I had that under my belt. I had certifications in lifeguarding and water safety instruction. I taught swimming at the local beach in our town, which very unfriendly closed the end of July.
What town?
In Hudson, New Hampshire.
Okay.
Yeah. So the geese were not on our side that year with regard to E. coli. So they shut us down and me and my bachelor's degree hit the road. I did manage to land a job as a receptionist with a bachelor's degree in politics. Minimally, I was able to answer the phone and make nice in the lobby. So at least I had made a start. So from there, as you can imagine, I got bored pretty fast. And this is, although I'm dating myself, this was a time before we had PCs on the desks. This was not prevalent in the office environment. So it really was me and the phone. The calls were a variety of, please transfer me to extension 302. That got stale. But like you call into a doctor's office, you need to make an appointment. Sometimes folks would rush right into what they were calling about. So I supported a medical devices organization, and we had software on board the unit. And we did have an applications support staff. So sometimes folks would call in, please transfer me to application support. Sometimes they dive right in. Hey, I'm in this screen, trying to advance. I'm trying to measure the image. I hit F1, nothing happens. And the other thing that a bachelor's degree will give you is I was pretty good at pattern recognition. I had been through some training. They were kind enough to take me on a tour and show me the devices. I participated in a few positioning studies. So I understood what the software was about. And there were a few questions that I did recognize. I recognized what they were talking about. I said, you know what? Go to this screen, hit this key. That ought to do it. And something happened there, Andrew, because not only was there satisfaction in being able to solve the problem, right? If you're a fixer, there's a zing of fixing something. But I was able to help that person. We've all called into call centers and you've had to wait forever. These people were extremely appreciative. Oh my gosh, that's terrific. Thank you so much. Got them on their way. And there was a real satisfaction in that. So while I'm basking in my satisfaction, others are noticing that I'm doing this. And there's a mix of reactions. Some are really thrilled, oh, Jen, that's great. One less call in the queue. And others are sort of looking on saying, why is our receptionist answering application support questions on the phone? That might not be kosher. So there was certainly a mix, but there was also a recognition that maybe we need to do something to keep her out of trouble. She has a propensity to wander, but she obviously also has some expertise and a willingness to learn. Let's see if we can put that to use. So my efforts were rewarded with a PC on my desk at the reception area, which was like a whole new world. I got to enter data in Excel. That was exciting at the time. But I also got to do a little bit more. My title formally became Help Desk Coordinator. And they armed me with some safe level 1 questions that it wasn't going to be a liability if I jumped in to try to answer. But then also there were other questions. It was iterative because I could build on that knowledge while also creating the early knowledge base that we had for the rest of the application support organization. I wasn't necessarily creating the content, but I was using my new computer to enter the content into the knowledge base. So that way I was advancing my knowledge beyond level 1 and iteratively becoming a little bit more useful to the organization. So that too was satisfying. I would say that was probably the first experience that I had in a technology setting where I felt that simultaneous rush, being able to fix something, but also to be useful.
And so you invent a position for yourself and you invent the knowledge base. What happens next?
And then I get bored, so I have to go do it someplace else, Andrew. You can't keep her down on the farm long, right? So I spent a couple of years there. I was never much of a job hopper, but I did have an opportunity to go to work for a software company in Cambridge supporting clinical trial software. And it was a similar role. It was a level 1 support help desk, and I had high-level training on the software itself. And that lasted about 15 minutes before my eyes started wandering, because now you know how I am. They let me into the labs to help set up test software. And that, drum roll, is where I discovered Oracle databases. So the software was built on Oracle technology, and they did need some help testing out the lab software. And it was on Windows. That's not quite as exciting as some of the larger systems. No shade to Microsoft, but I was allowed to install and configure the Oracle databases. And that really gave me appreciation, not only for the technology itself, kind of a taste of systems administration, because you have to kind of know your way around the machine beyond the setup instructions. But again, in the spirit of continuous learning, had the opportunity to understand how the software was interacting with the database technology underneath. You get a little bit into the guts of the code. You put your hands on the machine, and then you get on the phone and somebody's asking you a question about the software itself. And I found myself naturally being able to produce some answers, again, exceeding that remit of level 1 tech support from what I was learning on the ground, to say, you know what, click here, go here, because this is what's happening behind the scenes. So if you do this, this is going to be the result. And again, that too was very satisfying. It was just building an additional cache of information. And also, I would say, an early introduction to architecture, right? I'm an enterprise architect by trade. And this is really what I love to do. I love to understand the interdependencies around different technology components. And this was the next rung up the ladder, let's say, in expanding what I wanted to do with information technology.
You must have learned some SQL there as well.
I did. So here's a funny story. I spent about maybe a year and a half, 2 years there, and I ended up doing pre-sales support for a server company in the area. And again, it was a phone-based thing. We were doing technical support for the first line sales organization. If they had a customer ask a question about the equipment, we were called the product information group. And yes, they called us pigs, and we loved it. We wallowed in it. We wallowed in it, Andrew. So we were on the back end, and we would help them look up answers, or, feed them the technical information so that they could sound articulate to the salespeople, ultimately make the sale. This job was unfortunately short-lived, because maybe 3 months after I joined, they had announced they were relocating the call center to California, and I had no interest in moving to California, so did find myself facing yet another change. But so did everybody else in the organization, and our boss was double duty managing the product information group, but also as a contributor to sales to the CRM implementation of Siebel. And just hanging over the cube wall one day, we came out and he's scratching his head, and we lost our DBA, and we have the product team on the ground and having some difficulty getting past this thing. We executed this function, and we're looking at the query behind it, select all from this table where X equals 3, whatever the query was, and it's just not coming back. So what am I? I'm just a pre-sales technical engineer, right? I said, well, did they look at the query itself? Because if that's a big table and there's not an index on that column that you're selecting against, that's never going to come back.
Table scan.
Mm-hmm. So that was apparently revolutionary to the CRM team who had lost their DBA, right? Very, very simple, but in the right place at the right time. He got a little twinkle in his eye. And he ran away. He walked into the room and he came up with the ring and he had the answer. And he probably didn't say, Jen said, do this. That's fine. I'll forgive him. But what he did come back with is a business card. He said, hey, we just hired a contract DBA and he can only work nights. We probably need some help on the ground. Did you ever have any interest in doing Oracle database support? And I said, well, let me tell you, Mike, I've actually done a little bit and I'm happy to help out with this. So that was, again, another really important waypoint for me, because it gave me some practical experience, most of which was earned off hours working with the vampire DBA who came in at 11, God bless him, after his day job. And I would hang out and we would talk exports and imports and backups and the basics of database administration until he just couldn't take it anymore. He's like, look, I'm willing to work nights, but I'm not willing to train nights. I've told her all I can come up with, and let's send her on her way. But it was just enough, because when the call center closed, I was able to know just enough to earn a junior DBA position with a local manufacturing company. And really from there, that is where I was able to use my creativity to create increasingly more expansive roles throughout IT. That was really the starting point.
Well, that kind of curiosity and initiative to like, hey, I really want to learn this thing, even though it may not be immediately practical or practicable. I've seen over and over with underserved guests as kind of a recurring theme. And the same thing happened to me. I was in a job programming BASIC, but I wanted to learn C++ and object-oriented programming. And everyone's like, why are you bothering to do that? I'm like, because that's where I want to be. I find that interesting, and I don't want to just do this forever. And I had no specific thing in mind, but then lo and behold, a nights and weekends test driver writing job opened up where I got to write C++, and that was a career changer.
The beauty of technology, Andrew, is that you never really know. We call ourselves lifelong learners. I can tell you're one. I'm sure you've talked with them. There's learning to do a job and there's training, but then there's learning for the sake of learning because you never really know where it's going to go. And at the pace of technology, if we see where we were when they put that computer on my desk in, the early, I'm not going to tell you, to where we are now, look at how quickly we have experienced technological advancements, things that we were learning along the way. When you have the spirit of learning and a channel of creativity, I would call it, those two things are magical because really you can take it anywhere. There was a statistic recently about 60% of the jobs that our graduates are going to come out and face in the marketplace really haven't been created yet. If you think about the investments in new renewable technologies, and the investments in automation and machine learning and data science, there are roles that we have not imagined yet. So that piece of information that you're going to pick up along the way, always put it in your pocket because you never really know where you're going to use it.
And some of them end up becoming bedrock, like learning SQL, and some of them not so much, but you just learn them, enjoy it, and then you never know when it's going to come in handy.
That is true. I think another key ingredient of that as well, I mentioned from that place where I arrived, let's say, as a DBA, I have literally created every job role I've held since that time. And it's just been a permutation of it, right? So, you walk into database administration. I had the opportunity to contribute to an ERP implementation project. I would say that was probably my first foray into platform management, environment management, because what I realized was my role was as Oracle DBA, but understanding the implementation of this enterprise system required me to understand the server technology underneath, the application technology, how the users were going to use the system. And this was a place where everything was an Oracle problem. You log in, you get an Oracle code, there's something wrong with the Oracle database. And I always had the hot potato, but that's fine. Give it to me. I'm going to show you why it's likely a problem with that file system on that server that's unavailable. Or perhaps the user navigated to this one thing to leverage this interface where you just changed the stored procedure and the code's wrong. Sometimes it's a database issue. Okay, fine. Sometimes it's a database issue, but only about 60 to 70% of the time.
It's usually self-inflicted wounds.
Well, that's what all administrators say. What did you do? The perfectly run system is the one with no people in it. So stay out of my database and it'll run great. But again, those sorts of experiences give you the opportunity, if you're willing to take it, to branch out and to learn new roles, to develop new roles. And I had used that knowledge. I identified an opportunity to really branch out into environment management, was able to construct a role for myself as an infrastructure manager. A big pivotal moment in my career, I'll never forget it. I had set the meeting with my manager. I had my pitch ready to go. I had all the requirements, what needed to be done, gaps that needed to be filled in the environment to do this job, and my unique qualifications to do it. But the meeting was scheduled for September 11th, 2001.
Oof.
So I had to think about it a little bit. I went out, took a drive at lunch and was listening to the radio. And nobody really knew what was going to happen. We were all at work when it happened. We rolled the televisions out of the data center so we could watch what was going on. And it was this terrible feeling of what was going to happen next. And it was probably not the best day to have this career altering conversation, but it was almost a great distraction to get away from it for a minute. And I said, Jack, do you still want to have this meeting? He's like, I'm okay if you're okay. So I walked in with my job description and I said, look, this is what I'm seeing in the environment, and this is what I think we should do. And here's why. And here would be the roles and responsibilities. And here's why I think I'm uniquely suited to do it. And he laughed at me. Moment of panic. I said, why are you laughing at me? I'm thinking, is the day getting to you? You having a moment? No, he's like, I don't think I've met anyone before that was as clear on what they wanted as you. I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Can I have it now?
Yeah, exactly. So can I start tomorrow? Are we good? Are we good? But that was instructive as well, because it's one thing to know what needs to be done. You also need to understand how it best suits your path and how it best serves the needs of the company. There has to be a natural synergy among those things, right? And I've said before, we as technologists exist to support the needs of the business. Technology for the sake of technology is super cool, but likely doesn't last long. There has to be a business reason. There has to be a justification. There has to be an impact on the bottom line from a performance perspective on meeting the business goals of the company. And using all of the knowledge that we gain as technologists and being able to put that together into a role that makes sense, we also, using that creativity that we've talked about, really need to understand how does that meet the needs of the business? And then personally, does it align with what my personal priorities are? Is there a match there between my own goals professionally and personally and the goals of the company? Put those two things together, and usually you will find an opportunity to fill a role that exists or create a whole new one that you alone are uniquely qualified to do that furthers the needs of the business.
Hey, sport. How was school today?
It was okay, Dad. How was work?
Actually, I had a rough day. Leading an engineering team is hard. I mean, I have to ship new software, meet deadlines, and tackle new projects while keeping my team focused on the day-to-day. It's hard to keep up.
Jeepers, Dad. Why don't you call Syrinx? They're the software engineering firm run by software developers. They helped Billy's dad. He used to be stressed out like you. He was missing deadlines, his team was overworked, and a bunch of folks left the company because it was too stressful. But then he called Syrinx, and they put developers to work right away. He hit all his deadlines and freed up his team to do other work. His boss was so happy Billy's dad got some extra time off.
Time off? Wow. What did he do with that?
He spent it with Billy.
Aww. That's a swell idea, son. I'll call Syrinx today. Now, you go wash up for supper.
I think a lot of the time businesses can be sort of myopic and look at, all right, we need a woman to help us with Oracle DBA. And the DBA says, yeah, I'll go in and run some backups and check out some query plans and do this, but not really looking at, well, why does the company need a DBA? Oh, because everything depends on the database. Oh, we actually need these abilities that aren't necessarily a DBA job description. And
Exactly.
The company's like, well, I don't know if we're going to go hire someone new to do that. So yeah, it does become your job to sell that to the company and make them realize this is actually what we need.
And it's a gift. So there are those that will say, that's not my job. And they're going to stay in their swim lane. And they're going to do their job. And they're probably going to do the heck out of their job. And that's terrific. It's probably the only job they'll ever do. And in our environment, what happens when that job goes away? And that's not specific to technology, right? You can see that sort of behavior in so many different industries. It's really part of, I think, the challenge that we're facing today in folks leaving the workforce. One of the contributing factors, if you're not stretching, if you are not growing, using your creativity to figure out what can I do next, if you're staying in that swim lane, you are ultimately becoming vulnerable. If you're going to take those opportunities to stretch a little bit, well, this isn't really my area, but I can see that you probably have this problem here and you might want to use this to fix it. That's going to open up a whole new arena of opportunity that you're going to have that option to go to should things not go well for you back at home base.
Why do you think so many people are kind of opting out and looking for new opportunities?
I think there are a lot of different reasons. This is, as you know, something that I've been watching very closely, and not only from a technology standpoint, but obviously we're seeing statistics that women are leaving the workforce at a higher clip in general. And this is not new to the pandemic. We were seeing this even before. I would say I was reading studies and doing some talks maybe 2 to 3 years ago on the fact that we are seeing women enter college into STEM programs and technology fields, but not staying in jobs in that field when they get out into the workforce beyond like 5 years. There's going to be a bucket of people that have decided that their priorities no longer align with their employer's priorities, and they have the freedom to exit and to change course. We see them as leaving the workforce, but they are making a conscious change to pivot to doing something different. And by the way, if that means that you are in the home, raising your children, doing housework, that doesn't mean you're not working.
Oh, that's definitely work.
It is definitely work. It's harder work. Recent studies show if we were to include the work, look at that as work, if we were to redefine that sort of work, it would add, 2 to 3% to the overall GDP of this country. But we're not looking at it that way. We're calling that not working. You're no longer working, right? So that's one bucket. I applaud people that are able to make that change. I'm even a little bit jealous. I haven't won the lottery yet. So I'm with this other bucket where folks are faced with a choice of my priorities have changed at home base. The priorities and the objectives of my employer may have changed. The requirements of my job may have changed. So we have a bucket of people whose requirements of their jobs, both in the home and at work, men and women both, have changed. So there's a decision point there. Chances are, if we were to redefine how we approach work, if we were to look at employment as more of a conversation rather as a contract, and if we were to have the flexibility to explore how do folks bring value to an organization, whether it is inside the office, whether it is in their home office, whether it is off hours of a traditional business day or otherwise. If we were able to expand our scope of what is work and how do we bring value to meet the objectives of a business, I think we would find intersection points where folks that are feeling like they don't have an opportunity to stay in the workforce likely find that there are things that they can do, new things that would be fulfilling not only for them, but for the organization they work for.
This makes me think of my wife was a very successful inside salesperson at Monster.com. And she was going to leave because we had our second child and, it just wasn't going to work right. And one of her colleagues was also going to leave. And they said, well, wait a minute, would you guys work if you were part-time? Like, what if we gave you one territory and you split the hours and split the compensation, but we gave both of you full benefits? And you could only come in a couple days a week and still do pretty well. And so they did that job share for quite some time, where they kind of reinvented what the role looked like and got to keep two women that were very good at selling Monster's products and services to stay with them.
That's a great example. Do you know, I was watching a news piece on Sunday morning. They were talking about exactly that, with a focus on what are the ingredients at the root of this challenge. And it was noted that job sharing was a very popular alternative for women right around that time frame. For some reason, it has fallen off the table as an option, but certainly one that we should be looking at bringing back into the spotlight. The pandemic has certainly taught us that a lot of work can be done from just about anywhere. Frontline work is a little bit different, but even there are opportunities to change the nature of frontline work. I've recently started doing, in my day job, I've started doing some work around automation of asset management. In utilities, we send folks out into storms to fix transmission lines. We send them out into high voltage areas that are pretty unsafe for humans. And we're starting to see that there are ways to augment what people bring to the table with automation. It doesn't replace them. It augments what they can do. makes things safer. It makes things more doable. There are lessons to be learned there if we start to think about how we apply that to maybe non-traditional deskless sort of occupations where we could start modifying slightly with job sharing, with automation, creating whole new channels of engagement that are more manageable for folks to adopt, to remain employed, and to live their lives. I think one of the things that we've learned with this pandemic, before everything stopped, we were still talking about how busy we were still talking about how crazy we were. And even though everything stopped and there were definite downsides to that, if folks are honest with themselves, they saw that there were some benefits to life slowing down. Not so much being completely isolated and at home, but because things evened out, because there was a leveling of responsibilities. There was a change to the pace of life. And there's no reason why we can't use technology, optimized processes to maintain the good of what came from a quality of life perspective in the way we've lived our lives the 18 months while still rebuilding and returning to normalcy in a better way and continuing to add value.
Yeah, I think that I, for one, at the beginning of the lockdown, oh, all right, well, I'm home. My wife's home. My kids are home. Hey, guys, what's going on? Let's do some fun stuff together. Let's cook some meals. Hey, it's really weird. It's a Tuesday night and we're all here.
Yes.
It was kind of novel when we had been running in every direction with work and sports and all sorts of activities. Terrible experience overall, but definitely a few silver linings that were nice upsides for spending time. And I think it did make a lot of folks question, do I really need to go in 5x8? Can I do more of this from home? And I think another thing people have been exploring is, what is a work day? For me, it's very nebulous. At 7 a.m., there's emails to answer. And if I let myself at 11 p.m., there is the same thing. So how do you want to batch it up so that you don't spend all of your waking hours doing that, but you do respond in a timely manner when people are blocking and waiting for you? How do you manage overlapping time during the day versus what might be your own time of working productively from 7 to 9 p.m.? How's that been for you?
So I think you're absolutely right. We have been literally forced to do many things at the same time to make sure that we are preserving those pockets of day. Here's a funny story. When I was working for a manufacturing company, remote work was new. I had created a situation for myself after I had my fourth child that I could work from home a little bit more often. And Skype was very prevalent at the time. And we used Skype very frequently in the office. And the mandate was that we were to use Skype with the camera because there was a belief that if you were able to look somebody in the eye while they were talking to you, you could ensure that they were 100% engaged on what you were talking about in the meeting, that they weren't multitasking, that they weren't doing something that was not immediately related to what that person wanted to talk to you at the time. I have never worked that way. I do my best work when I'm vacuuming. Shh, don't tell anybody. Because that's when I do my thinking. All right. So I was at home. I had a meeting with my boss and it was on a conference call. And first thing he said, he's like, all right, first question, why aren't we on Skype? I said, because if I wanted you in my home, I'd invite you to lunch. I am talking to you and I am 100% engaged in what you're saying, but I'm also folding a basket of laundry and you don't want to see that. Oh, okay. So it was a risk. I remained employed. That was terrific. Others may not. But it's an example of where we have been forced to do a lot of things at the same time, but haven't we also been given the opportunity to find ways to overlap that stretch out the truly open times that we have to spend with our family when we're sitting around on a Tuesday night? Maybe we're going to watch a movie. Maybe we're going to play a game or do a puzzle. We're not doing it on the side when it's Mike's turn to put Scrabble tiles down. You're over here under the table answering an email on your phone. We're not doing that anymore because you were under the table answering an email while maybe you weren't speaking on a Zoom call where the camera wasn't on, where you were completely engaged, but you were offline and able to do a little something in the background to smooth out that time. Multitasking done right isn't necessarily a bad thing. I know it's gotten a bad rap. And again, back to our definition of work. I am still meeting the obligations of my organization, my obligations to my client, my obligations to my volunteer organizations and to the other work that I do while I am vacuuming the floor. Because what I'm doing is I'm thinking through, I'm going over, I'm finishing, I'm completing that PowerPoint because I needed to think through, how do I really want to present this? And the work is done. No one's the wiser, except for those that are going to listen to this podcast and learn my secret. But that needs to be okay. I was in a panel discussion for my executive MBA cohort, and we were talking about return to work and what are we going to do? And a woman brought up the fact that it's been difficult to manage exactly what you were talking about there. When do we work? When do we not work? And sometimes folks are home and they're doing housework, and that's not really work. They need to be working and they need to be coding and they need to be doing this other thing. And I couldn't help myself. I said, well, that's work too. That's a whole other, I didn't challenge her directly, but I said, isn't that a great next forum conversation to have? Is the nature of work and what do we call work and how do we complete work in the time given? As soon as we start looking at that differently, we're going to understand whether we're in an office or at home or not, that all of it's work, whether it's work for ourselves or work for our employer or work for our family. It is all work. It is all providing value in one way or another. And there's not a weighting of value. The weighting of the value of that work is up to the individual to manage the prioritization at any given time. We really can't give away that responsibility to others to tell us what is and is not work, what value does that work bring, and when should it be done.
Traditionally, there is a very parochial kind of attitude, like, you know, if I look over your shoulder and you got a browser open and it's on some recreational site, that's a problem. And well, if I see that over and over and not seeing productivity, yeah, all right, that's a legit concern. But sometimes it's just smacking the knuckles with a ruler because that's the traditional thing to do.
But you know what, Andrew? The key word that you just said was productivity. Maybe that person is taking a minute to let their mind wander from what they were doing. But if you're an organization that has proper performance-based metrics in place to manage the contributions and the productivity of your employees, doesn't matter what they're doing with that website. If they are meeting the objectives that you put in front of them, that's the true measure. And of course, objectives can change. Maybe if you feel like he has or she has more time, if they're getting their work done and they look like they have free time, give them some stretch assignments. They're going to learn something new. Maybe it's a lifelong learner and they need to learn something new, and new performance metrics can be put in place. But that is the key. The measure isn't how much time they're spending at that desk. The measure is, are they meeting the objectives that you put in front of them? And that's the true measure of productivity.
Use Zoom or Teams or Skype? What do you guys use?
I use it all. Bring it. I can do it all.
Do you have Zoom fatigue yet?
I do. I find that although I'm in a sales position, I'm an introvert. When you do the little introvert surveys, I score like 24 out of 25. So if I'm on all day, and I do make a concerted effort for meetings that I'm leading or meetings with clients or just ones that people that I feel like we have something to talk about, we want to look them in the eye, I could be talking my face off all day on video and I'm exhausted at the end of the day. I really need to go and be alone somewhere with a closed door, hang a sign, I don't know what's for dinner, ask your father, somebody feed the dog because I need a minute.
Your social battery is drained?
All done. I'm out of spoons. They're all gone. Those days are becoming a little more frequent. But for me, being off the road, I'm a born-again runner. The way that I coped with getting away from, because you really can't be in the house with the door closed, someone is going to find you. So I had to get my Audible app and I had to find a book and I re-embraced running. So I get out of the house, I disconnect, I get away, and that has really been one of the nice side effects. Is there was a nice health component to it. I got out, I got some fresh air. Actually ran my first half marathon last October. On the road again, getting ready to do a full in September. There's been some nice things that have come out of it.
It's a lot of running. Besides Audible, are you using any apps like Nike Run Club or anything like that?
I live by my Fitbit. I wake up in the morning, how did I sleep? I can't tell how I slept. I have to have my Fitbit tell me how I slept and rate my sleep, right? It's kind of sick. But it also map my pace. It'll map the distance and show me the progression, which is good because I really needed to select a marathon by when did they close the route? I'm not doing Boston in 4 hours. I'm very much a wogger. So I'm proud of the endurance, but I need a little extra time according to my pace. So understanding the pace is important. And of course, in addition to Audible, I have my favorite podcast player where I listen to the Underserved podcast occasionally on a run.
Thank you for the plug.
You're welcome.
What is your favorite podcast player?
I use the Apple podcast player.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like Apple Podcasts on Google. The Google Play one's pretty good. The Google Podcasts, I think they call it now. But there's also one called Podcast Addict that's very good at managing tons of different RSS feeds that you're pulling podcasts out of. I've been using that one a lot lately.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to give that a try. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. The other hobby that we talked about during the pre-call was you're into knitting as well, right?
I am. Since we last talked, I finished that sweater. So yeah, I have competing hobbies. Obviously, I'm not knitting while I'm running. So taught myself to knit and crochet when I was 8, and I love it. My family's kind of sick of me because they have multiple Afghans and scarves and all this good stuff. But I did find one of my tackle my fears because I have time sort of activities in the last 18 months was I had ordered a fisherman sweater pattern. If you've ever seen them, the cabled knit. There's an outfit in Ireland that has created patterns that align with the clan families. So I'm Clan O'Brien on my mother's side, and my husband ordered me a clan pattern back in, it was probably 6 or 8 years ago. So
there's like meaning behind those little ropes or whatever?
There is. They like to tell you that they have ordered them according to the fishing community that they came out of. Really, this was something that was born in the 50s when Grace Kelly started wearing Irish sweaters, and they figured we're on to something. So they started ordering different cable knits, and it's just a combination of cables and moss stitch. My husband finally said, "Are you going to do that sweater that I ordered you?" So I said, "Fine, we'll do it." So I did. I finished it. It's beautiful. I made it for my brother. Unfortunately, we could fit both of us in it. The gauge was a little off. So I'm not really done. I'm going to, back to the drawing board. I promised him I ordered a little more wool. I'll have it ready for you by Christmas. It'll be fine. We learned something, but it's very relaxing. It's a way to let your mind wander and have your hands going at the same time.
How long did it take you end to end to do that sweater?
Well, I was learning the pattern. So I did and redid the first 3 inches probably 4 times. It did take me about 8 months to complete the whole thing. This time will be faster because I understand the pattern and, I understand the mistakes. And it's like a Where's Waldo if you look at the sweater. Oh, look at that cable off. Oh, that was when I wasn't paying attention. And lessons learned. I think it will take less time now. How long till Christmas? I'll have it done. I promise.
Yeah, like 7 months. Yeah.
Well, I can shave a month.
Version 2.0 should come out a little faster than 1.0.
It absolutely
Have
will.
fewer bugs.
Absolutely. This one's definitely going to be better.
I think when anyone creates anything, whether it's a sweater, code, whatever, they look at it, they're their own harshest critic, and they're the ones that can do that Where's Waldo and point to, oh, this part here is crap. And anyone else looking at it is like, this is great.
That's right.
This is wonderful. They don't even notice these little imperfections that we can't help but fixate upon.
I like those people.
So Jen, thank you very much for coming in and sharing with us your stories and experiences for the listeners of Underserved.
Andrew, thank you so much for inviting me. I had so much fun sharing stories, and it was interesting to hear your experiences as well. So thanks again for having me.
Excellent. We appreciate it. And we'll talk to everyone soon on the next episode of Underserved.